All right, continuing our study of the book of Judges. Last week we took a little bit of a sidestep into Ruth, but as we discussed last time, it's interesting that I believe that the story of Ruth occurs around the time of Gideon. And why do I say that? Because when the book of Ruth opened, what was the condition in Israel at the time? That's right. They were having a famine. They were oppressed, and so Naomi and her husband left, and they went to Moab. And then while they were there, they stayed there about 10 years. We know that Naomi's husband died, her 2 sons died, but then things got better. And so it kind of fits in the story of Judges that Israel was oppressed by the Midianites at the time of Gideon, and then he became judge. He defeated them, and then they had another time of prosperity after that. So before we skipped ahead, we were finishing up with chapter 3 and 4, which tells the story of the judges Deborah and Barak. And you remember we had that peculiar story about the wife of the Cajun, Heber. Her name was Jael. And so when the foreigner, when Sisera, the captain, was fleeing, she comes to the tent of Jael. Jael offers him a cup of milk. He goes inside her tent. He lays down. Jael covers him so he would be comfortable, and then promptly does what? Drives a tent peg through his head and kills him. And then after that defeat of that particular enemy, those were the Canaanites, of course. Then in chapter 5 is essentially a song. It's a poem written about the victories and how good God has been to the nation of Israel. And you can read it. It's interesting. But one of the things that it does, it lauds Jael. If you look at chapter 5, verse 24, it says, "Most blessed of women is Jael." You rarely find a salutation like that about a woman. In fact, there's only one other that I can think of. Yeah, Mary herself.
But remember when the guy wouldn't go by himself? He said, if you go with me, I'll go. He said, okay, but the credit's going to go to a woman.
That's right. And so the credit really went to 2 women, didn't it? It went to Deborah, and then it went to Jael.
Right.
And she's one of the objects, a principal object of this song. And it says, "Most blessed of women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed is she of women in the tent. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a magnificent bowl she brought him curds. She reached out her hand for the tent peg, and her right hand for the workman's hammer, and she struck Sisera. She smashed his head." That was interesting. She drove a tent peg through him. How did she smash his head? She's probably like a lot of people are. So drive that tent peg.
It's a phone.
That's right.
Her aim isn't that good.
Her aim wasn't that good, but
She got it done.
but it's interesting. You know, I looked at that and I kind of chuckled. I thought, well, if she was good at driving the tent peg, she wouldn't have smashed his head at all. It would have been intact except for that nail sticking right through it. But it says she cracked, she smashed, she crushed his head. And it's interesting because in the book of Judges, you'll see at least one other reference to that type of thing happening. I looked over, and if you read ahead, you looked at in chapter 9, verse 53, and this is about the end of Abimelech. And so Abimelech is laying siege to this tower. It says in verse 53, "But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull." So there we have 2 incidents of a woman crushing the head of a man. Now, ladies, I don't want to give you women any ideas.
Don't make us mad.
Mary's going to crush the head of the serpent.
Exactly. In Genesis 3:15,
Yeah.
remember the curse, if you look back at that. And that's all, this is a foreshadowing. Because when Adam and Eve were cursed, you know, Adam's curse was he's going to have to eat the ground. Eve's curse was that she would bring forth children in great pain, and she would serve her husband all of her life.
Don't go getting ideas.
Right. Genesis 3:15, as Lon pointed out to us, it says, and I will put enmity between you, that is the serpent, and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and he, that is the seed of the woman, shall crush your head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. So the idea is that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. So we see this crushing of the head here by the woman being a foreshadowing of what?
Christ.
Of Christ, exactly. Christ, born of a woman, without the intervention of man, conceived by the Holy Spirit. And Christ is the one who ultimately crushed the head of the serpent, Satan. And so we have here some foreshadowing of that prophecy of Genesis. That is the seed of the woman crushing the head. And the guy whose head gets crushed all the time is the embodiment of evil. He's an oppressor of Israel. So an interesting thought here. Okay. What's that?
Better behave.
Better be good.
We serve you, but you better behave.
I'm gonna take my hammers out of my house.
So guys, if you ask for water and she brings you milk in a magnificent bowl, be careful. Check both of her hands, all right? Check both
I
hands.
did 10 pair.
And for heaven's sake, don't let her cover you with a rug. All right. Chapter 6 is about our old friend Gideon. The story of Gideon is very interesting in several respects. One of the things that we see in the book of Gideon, the story, and all of us know the story, but as we read through it, I want you to focus on a particular aspect of it. The first verse says, "Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian for 7 years." We have some hints of the things, of the sins that Israel was engaging in during the time of the judges that brought about God's wrath. But we see quite a number of them. And as I was going through, I made a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 different things that are told to us in the story of Gideon about what Israel was doing wrong at the time. So as we read through there, let's focus on that. So if we get through all the chapters today, which we probably won't, we're going to be talking about Gideon and then his son Abimelech. Gideon is often referred to as the 6th judge, and some refer to Abimelech as the 7th judge. But what we're going to see about Abimelech is he was an interesting character. He was, in fact, declared to be the king by a certain group. We always think of who we think of as the first king of Israel. Saul, yeah, and he was. He's good. Hey, good morning, Marty. Come on in. Almost Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I'm late.
That's quite all right.
You made it.
All in one piece.
Yeah. So we're going to see that Abimelech, he stands over us in a position of judge. He is declared king, but he's also a usurper. He is an evil man whose head gets crushed by a stone wielded by a woman. So, that is a rather ignominious death that he suffered. But we're going to see also, one of the things we see about the judges is that so far, and perhaps throughout, we're going to see that every judge that God raises up to deliver his people has a particular personal weakness. We've seen that in every one of them so far, and we're going to see the weakness or weaknesses that Gideon has, but despite his weakness or weaknesses, we see that God uses him in a mighty way to accomplish his purposes.
Was Samuel classified as a judge? Had he been the last judge? Or was he more of a prophet?
Yeah, we think of him as being one of the first prophets, but he's also referred to sometimes as a judge.
Because he would travel.
Yeah, because he was a leader. Certainly,
I was just curious
certainly a man of high position.
if he's classified as the last judge.
Yeah, and you see on our list here that we handed around, we have a number. You think classically, somebody asks you how many judges were there, and you think, well, there were 12 judges. That's what we think of. That's a number like the tribes of Israel and the number of apostles. But you look on our list, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. You got 14 there, and then maybe Samuel, so 15. So I don't know. Some of them maybe were, some of them maybe weren't. But anyway, they are who they are. All right, so let's read chapter 6 of Judges. Lon, you want to start reading for us?
The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the powers of the Midians were so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain cliffs, caves, and strongholds.
All right, pause right there so we can see. Again, as we read through here, as whoever happens to be reading, if you see in what we're reading of the revelation of some particular evil or shortcoming or problem in Israel, let's stop and let's talk about it. But evidently things got so bad during the time of Gideon that they were literally digging holes, and they were living, they were living in dens, and they were living in caves because they were so fiercely oppressed by the Midianites. Who were the Midianites, by the way? Who was Midian? Anybody remember?
He was one of the sons of Abraham and his second wife, Keturah.
Moses. Sure?
Positive.
Abraham? Okay.
Genesis 25, 1 and 2.
Very good, very good. All right, so he is an offspring of Abraham, but the Midianites have moved off. Where are the Midianites living?
Sounds like anywhere they want to.
That's exactly right. We're just like the 800-pound gorilla. But the Midianites were more or less to the east and to the south. I don't know if we see them on a map. Yeah, here we are. We see that Moses' father-in-law was a Midianite, if I remember correctly, and he was actually living way down here. Okay, so the Midianites were down east of the Sinai Peninsula, sort of down to the south. As Lon said, yeah, at this time they were living anywhere they wanted to, and they came whenever they wanted to, and they were quite destructive to the nation of Israel. Okay, read on.
Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites and Amalekites and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them on their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in those lands you live, but you have not listened to me." So
Okay.
that's the first.
That's the first, yeah. So what do we see there? It says, the Lord sent a prophet to the sons of Israel who said to them, and what do we have revealed in what Lon just said? What weakness do we see here?
Idolatry.
Idolatry, that's right. But in what particular form of idolatry, what was it that they were doing or they were saying that God found so offensive?
Well, they worship Baal, huh?
They worship Baal,
Which
yeah.
was giving him the credit for the crops and stuff like the weather and that.
Yeah. But listen to this. The prophet came and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, it was I who brought you up from Egypt and brought you out of the house of slavery, and I delivered you from the hands of the Egyptians."
So they're giving credit to someone
Or
else
trusting
other
in
than
him.
God.
Or trusting in him.
That's exactly. They aren't giving God the credit that he deserved. They were saying that either someone else brought them up out of Egypt, or what else? Perhaps even more subtle than that.
They did it.
That they did it by themselves. They were taking credit for doing something that God did. Okay, and I think it's probably some of both. They were worshiping the Baals, but the worship of the Baals could have been for present prosperity. But insofar as their history is concerned, they're probably patting themselves on the back and saying, "Yeah, we were the ones who delivered ourselves from the slavery of the Egyptians, and we are good, strong people." And God found that absolutely reprehensible that happened. And you're going to see that particular theme is reinforced later on in the selection of Gideon's army. Okay? All right. Read on. Tommy, you want to read?
Right.
Pass. All right. Anybody else? Who's our next reader? Jennifer, you want to read for us?
Sure,
Verse 11, yeah.
The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abizarite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites.
All right, pause right there. So the first scene we have of Gideon, where's Gideon?
Threshing wheat in a wine press.
In a wine press, yeah.
Hiding.
He was hiding. That's basically what he was doing. You typically you don't thresh wheat in a wine press. What's a wine press for?
Great.
Protection, that's what you need to.
That's right. So he was down because he was afraid. He was cowering. He was hiding away because he was afraid that some Midianite would be looking out and would see him doing some work and they'd come get his stuff.
You thresh wheat on the high point.
Let the
That's
wind
right.
ride it.
So the wind can carry away the chaff.
Exactly right. The threshing floors are typically.
And
That's
it's an
right.
open area, so it could be well seen.
That's right. That's right. So he was kind of like down in the basement at the time. The opposite place. All right, read on.
When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior."
Pause right there. Think about it. Think about that picture. Here's a guy who's cowering, he's hovering, and the angel of the Lord calls him what?
Mighty.
Mighty warrior.
Mighty warrior rather than Chicken Little. So why would the angel of the Lord? This is an angel that comes. He's actually the mouthpiece. He's actually speaking for God, and he declares Gideon to be a mighty warrior. Why would he do that in Gideon's lowly state?
God had already revealed it to him.
To Gideon? Well, Gideon didn't know it at the time. Yeah.
I think he had to, you gotta have somebody give you the insight or the courage to do it, that the God wants him, and God obviously thought Gideon had the backbone or the courage
That's right.
to obey and do it.
Yeah, that's right. And it turned out, God's selection was a good one. And yet that was a declaration by God to Gideon that you may think that you're a coward, but actually you're a mighty warrior. And you're going to be a mighty warrior by what? How?
Obeying
By
God.
my power.
That's right, just by my power. And if you do exactly what I tell you to do, you are going to be a mighty warrior, and you no longer have to be a coward. And you're going to see later on that he did become quite a mighty warrior. I mean, he is at the end of his life, or towards the end of his life, he is just the opposite. He's got this little ragtag army, and he first defeats 120,000. And after they're defeated, there's another 15,000 left, and he and his band of 300, they go chasing after the 15,000.
Go ahead.
So wow, I mean, he has really changed in his character. All right, read on.
Do you want to keep going?
Yeah, Jennifer.
"Pardon me, my lord," Gideon replied, "but the Lord is with us. Why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian."
Pause right there. We see a little bit how Gideon is different from the others based upon what Lon just read. And how is Gideon, how does he reveal here that he's different?
He acknowledges God delivered him out of Egypt and everything, but was asking, why are we in this state?
Exactly. In other words, he's recognizing that the people did not deliver them and that the foreign gods did deliver. He said, God Almighty has delivered, but even at the same time, he says, I know that God has delivered us, but why are we having such problems right now? And of course, if he'd have read the first 5 chapters, he'd know. Or even the first. But anyway, so reading wasn't his strong suit. So read on, Jim.
The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?"
Yeah, pause right there. We see a great revelation there. Go in the strength you have, and what is the strength that he has?
God.
God
Yeah,
Almighty.
it's the realization that God is the deliverer. God has done mighty things in the past, right?
Are we still talking about the angel?
No, we're still talking about Gideon.
But he's talking to the angel.
But yeah, Jennifer brings up a good point. The angel, at first it says the angel says, but in verse 14 it says, and the Lord looked at him.
No.
Mine
So-
is capital L.
Yeah, that's right. Which is Yahweh, which is the covenant name. But it's interesting. It starts off, the angel comes to him and talks to him, but then it says, this is the Lord talking. Okay? So
It
I
didn't say
think
the
it is.
angel of the Lord, it said the Lord.
That's right, the Lord. So when an angel comes, that is God's messenger. He is just right there with him. Okay, so the Lord looked at him and said, go in this your strength and deliver Israel from the hand of Midian. Why? Because I am sending you. I have sent you. In other words, if I am with you, you're going to be victorious. All right, read on, Jen.
This is another pardon me. Are we in 15?
15, yeah.
Pardon me, my lord, Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. The Lord answered, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. Gideon replied, if now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it is really you talking to me.
All right, pause right there. So we see a couple things about Gideon here. Number one, he was cowering, but then his strength is revealed. And what is his strength? Again, he has believed the truth about God. But then he also declares the truth about himself. He says, my family is the least in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's house.
It sounds like when I read that, it reminded me of a couple things. One was when God was trying to send Moses. He had these things, but then didn't Saul say the Benjamites were when he was going, when Samuel was telling him he was going to be king, he kind of said very similar things, like his clan was the smallest and all that kind of stuff.
So God uses the least for his purposes, and it's a very specific selection. This wasn't a random allotment. God went specifically to this guy, and it's interesting because he says, I am the youngest in my father's house, and who is his father? We learn later on that his father is an idolater, and he's one of the chief idolaters. And so the selection of Gideon is really quite an odd thing, and people have said, why in the world did God choose Gideon? He's young, he's weak, his father is an idolater. We see him cowering. He wasn't a guy who was challenging the Midianites. He wouldn't stand up there saying, look at me, come get me. He was
interesting though you say that, because if he was raised, or at least his father is practicing, yet he gives credit to God, not the Baals, which is good. So
it is.
Obviously he was.
Yeah. And the last thing Jennifer read there about Gideon, we see that Gideon is constantly asking for a sign. He's the guy who says, show me a sign, and he does it at least 5 times, at least 4 times that are recorded. So Gideon listens to God, and he says, all right, I hear what you're saying, but, how are you going to prove it? Can you do something to let me know that this is really you and that what you're saying is really going to happen? And it's interesting, you think that God might rebuke him for that. But the last sign that God gives to him, it's almost like God volunteers to give him a sign even before he asks. And we're going to see that later on. And so we ask ourselves sometimes when we think God is speaking to us, we want to be certain about it. And each of us, I think, at times said, God, I think I'm hearing from you, but if this is so, would you please give me a sign? And I think if we ask God that in earnest, that he will honor that. Now, will he always give us a sign like putting out the fleece? I wish he would. He doesn't always do that, but sometimes he does. Sometimes he'll give us a sign and just make it very clear to us. Either it's a physical manifestation, or sometimes he'll just let us know that, this is the right thing. This is the way you're supposed to go. This is what you're supposed to do. All right, verse 18. Troy, you want to read? This is Gideon starts off talking.
Well, I lost my place here. Okay, here we go. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offerings and set it before you. And he said, I will wait until you come back. So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread for an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the, mine says terebinth tree.
Terebinth, yeah, mm-hmm. Or an oak.
Yeah, okay, and presented them. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and the fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight.
All right, so Gideon, there he gets his first sign. Number one, an angel of the Lord came to him. That is no small thing, okay? Later on, he realizes that it is an angel of the Lord, and he fears for his life. He thinks, I've now seen the Lord, I'm going to die. But anyway, so he's seen the Lord, and then he has this miraculous sign. He brings the offering, and the offering is consumed by fire. All right, read on.
Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face.
He thinks he's going to die at that point. Read on.
Then the Lord said to him, Peace be with you. Do not fear, you shall not die. So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it, The Lord is Peace. To this day it is still in Ophrah of the Azarites. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it.
Pause right there. Now that's no small task, right? So here is the youngest son, Gideon, and God gives him a task, which is to take what? It says, take your father's bull and the second bull, 7 years old, and pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the grove, the Asherah grove that's beside it. Go on. 26.
And build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. And take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him.
Pause right there. If you put a period there, we'd have thought a lot more of Gideon, but read on what he did.
But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night.
Okay, so what did the angel call him? He said, valiant warrior? Well, okay. Somewhat valiant. He's developing at this point. He doesn't march out at noonday to do it. He says, well, let's wait for the sun to go down. I can kind of sneak in and I'll do what God tells me to do, but maybe I won't get caught. Maybe I won't get punished for it. All right, read on. Joey, you want to read verse 28?
No, thanks.
All right, Sarah?
In the morning, when the men of the town got up, there was Baal's altar demolished, and the ashen pole beside it cut down, and the second bull sacrifice of the newly built altar. They asked each other, who did this? When they carefully investigated, they were told, Gideon, son of Joash, did it. The men of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son, he must die, because he has broken down Baal's altar and cut down the ashen pole beside it. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around it, you are going to plead Baal's cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar.
Pause right there. So what do you think Joash was saying at this point in time? So, you know, all the followers of Joash was apparently a pretty powerful guy. You know, when they see that the altar has been torn down, Joash he had actually built this altar to Baal, that his own son tore it down. They rise up and they, we got to kill this young man. And what does Joash say?
Well, if Baal is really a god, he can defend himself.
Yeah, let him fight his own battles. Kind of interesting. You got to wonder at this point in time if Joash is kind of wondering about whether he's doing the right thing. Okay, read on.
So that day they called Gideon Jerubbaal, saying, let Baal contend with him, because he broke down Baal's altar. Now all the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people joined forces across over the Jordan and camped in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon and blew a trumpet, summoning the Azarites to follow him. He sent messengers through Manasseh, calling them to arms, and also to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, so that they too went up to meet them.
Okay, so there's a big battle that's getting ready to rage, and they say it's in the Jezreel Valley, right? See, the Jezreel Valley is right here, sort of in the heart of Israel. The Jordan River Valley is right here. The Jezreel Valley is also where another great battle is going to occur in the future. What's that? Armageddon, yeah. The city of Megiddo is right here. It overlooks the valley, and Megiddo is the place where Armageddon, I guess the Battle of Armageddon breaks out. So that's where this battle is going to be. Okay, verse 36, 36 through 40. Terry, would you read that for us?
Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out dew, a bowl full of water.
Yeah, you'd think he'd be convinced by that, right? That's a pretty solid sign. But he still wasn't convinced that God had spoken to him. So read on.
And Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew." That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew.
So we have this request. Gideon asked for a sign, and so he lays out the fleece. Why do you think Gideon asked those two times for additional signs? God had already given him several signs. Number one, the angel of the Lord came to him and spoke to him face to face. Second, his offering was consumed by fire miraculously. And now we have, and then of course he's able to destroy the altar, and there's no negative repercussion from that. But then he sees this army gathering, right? And it's a mighty army. It's at least 135,000 men who drew swords. And so you can see at that point, he's thinking, really, God, me against these guys, 135,000 guys with swords? And so he asks for a sign, and God answers it and gives him a sign. It's interesting, some of the ancient Jewish writers compare the two signs that were given. So the first sign is somewhat symbolic of Rahab and Jericho, and the second sign is somewhat symbolic or similar to Jonah and Nineveh. Think about that. How is the first sign similar to Rahab and Jericho? God's grace fell on Rahab, and the rest of Jericho was destroyed. And how is the opposite true with Jonah and Nineveh? Jonah went and Jonah preached, and all of Nineveh was saved. But Jonah, who was supposedly the voice of God, what did he do? He went out and he pouted. He went out and pouted in the desert. So it's a, you see that potential parallel there. But again, once again, it's interesting that we see Gideon, a judge, a servant of God. He's selected by God. He's given a task by God, and even after he has been given one sign, he is still concerned about God's promise, and he continues to ask. So, what do you see there?
Lack of faith.
Lack of faith.
I see him being.
Unlike us, right?
Yeah, I see him being.
Unlike us. When God speaks to us, we are always certain, and we never look back, and there we go, right? So, Gideon, a man like us. Hopefully God will deal with us just as favorably. All right, now chapter 7 tells an interesting story of the selection of the army, the mighty army that's going to surround the valiant warrior. All right, who's next? Kathy?
Go
ahead, Tom.
Before we go any further, I hate to put you on the spot, but I have to call you too. Can you give an example of God speaking to you?
God speaking to me? Yes. I will, as I've told you many times, I don't know why I happen to be the teacher here, but I appreciate the opportunity that you've given me to be the teacher here, but many times I'll be reading through the scripture or a lesson, and I'll read something and I don't have any understanding of it at all. I really don't. I'll read that and I'll say, I don't understand that, and I'll read some more and I don't understand it. And then I'll pray, God, please give me an understanding. Please give me a supernatural understanding of this. And by supernatural, I mean something that I wouldn't get from my own. And there are times that I know, boom, just God has told me what this means, what the relevance of it is. So yeah, that does happen to me. And others tell me.
Would anybody else like to give an example of God speaking directly to you, something big?
I imagine if we all thought, we could all come up with many examples. Anything come to your mind, Tom?
Well, I know that when I went to Vietnam, I was 19 years old. Just a young guy that really didn't have no idea what war was, and I still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I did ask the Lord to take care of me, and of course my family played very strong too, to take care of me every day, one day at a time.
Yeah.
Not try to show me something 6 months down the road. Just help me through that day.
Yeah.
And he did.
He did. And if we would all think back, we would think of things like that. I can think of another one you bring it up. I remember when my office was over on Corporate Boulevard, this is, 20 years ago. I remember that my law office was on the second floor, and on the first floor we had it available for lease, and we leased out the space on the first floor to a bank. And after we had the bank in there, I thought this is going to be great because I'll get a lot of business from the bank, And so I remember the day that the bank president came up there and he brought his lawyer up there and sat across from the desk from me, and the banker said, "This is my lawyer, he's going to be doing all of our legal business. I just wanted you to meet him." And I sat there and I was just so jealous of that because I really wanted to get that business. I just really did, and I was angry, I was upset. But guess what? 2 years later, both of those guys were in jail because of shaky dealings between the two of them. And I don't know who started. I think the banker started the shady dealings, but that particular lawyer went along with it because it's very lucrative. He made a lot of money in that process in 2 years, but then he lost every bit of it, including his freedom. I think he wound up dying in jail.
Well, I have.
And so that was an example of the Lord protecting me, contrary to my own desires. I didn't get what I wanted, but if I'd have gotten what I thought I wanted, watch out. Go ahead.
I've got several of them. I was trying to think after you asked that question. But one that really sticks out big in my head is that on March the 28th, okay, a long time ago, okay, I had a dream that God was going to bring me a mate in life, okay? And 30 years later, to the day, okay, March the 28th, 30 years later, this one came into my life. And I knew instantly that it was from God because He gave me a sign right there. And it's almost like I didn't choose her. She was chosen for me.
But
That's a biggie to me.
Tommy raised a very good question. We need to spend some time just focusing on and just being mindful of God operating around us, either in guiding us, taking us to a particular place, keeping us from certain things. Because again, if we really pray, if we really desire to be in the center of His will, He'll keep us there. Sometimes He'll discipline us, sometimes He'll reprove us, sometimes He will afflict us, sometimes He'll even scourge us. But He will receive us, and He'll put us exactly where He wants us to be. And then, go ahead.
I was hoping to hear somebody say a miracle like, I won the lottery.
Well, now look, Look, you won the lottery. Your wife sat here, you and your wife sat here 2 weeks ago, and you talked that your brother was cured of cancer and your wife was cured of cancer. I mean, you all won the lottery, all right? That is better than winning the lottery, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, that's nothing short of a miracle.
And then we
So,
went to the library.
and look, you know, there are a lot, there's a series, I was flipping through channels the other day, and there was a segment on about people whose lives were ruined by winning the lottery. I didn't watch it, but that was the title of it. You know, my life was ruined by the lottery. And that's probably more the rule than the exception. But, yeah,
Most of them end up broke within a set amount of time.
yeah. Yeah, all of a sudden they have a lot of friends. Right out there, they have a lot of friends.
I haven't won the lottery, but I have heard God's voice. And it was a really bad time. That's why I didn't want to tell you, because I was here. It was a really bad time. And I was in my bathroom getting ready for church one Sunday morning. Praying. God's answered my prayers many times, but this time I heard him talk to me. And he said, "Jackie, do you trust me?" And I said, "Yes, Lord, I trust you." And he solved the problem. It wasn't easy, and we went through really bad times, but I heard his voice. And if you ever hear anyone who has heard the Lord's voice, you know it's him, number one. Number two, several, he's asked, "Do you trust me?" So it was in his hands. He knew about it, and he was taking care of it. So to me, that's better than winning the lottery.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times I think the Lord reveals to us some things that He wants us to do, and we rely mostly on human intuition, and we decide, say, well, I'll put that aside and I'm going to do this first because it seems more important to me. And I think the Lord keeps giving us opportunities as we go through our life, but somehow or another I think He, and this is my thinking, that He don't expect us to follow all those rules. He puts them out there, He wants us to. But I think He knows we're human,
Right.
and we just can't help it.
That's the way we are. That's the way we are. But he always wants us to keep coming back to him, and he wants us to acknowledge, yeah, that we are weak.
Yes.
That's what he wants us to do. That's true. Anybody else? This is a good thing to talk about. It really is. You know, and Joanne's sitting over there. She's smiling.
It's the same thing with these kids. How many times have I said I'm getting out of this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's only been 7 years, almost 8 years.
Yeah.
But the Lord keeps sending me. And I bring it to the kids' attention sometimes. Why am I here? Why can't I go home? Why is my family not coming to visit me? Because the Lord wants you here.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm still doing it, because He wants me to.
Yeah.
Us to. And now He sent us this little baby, 2 days old, and we fell in love.
Like it or not, you're in love.
So the Lord's working on us, all of us,
Yeah.
daily.
Yeah. There's always something
But
going
we're
on.
too old to keep all these kids that they keep sending us. I mean, I told them this morning, the house is big enough for all of us, but this chaos, it's got to end with 6 of them, all talking at one time, running up and down the stairs. I'm waiting for the Lord to come shut them up, so.
You know, that excuse, I'm too old, that just doesn't work. That's been tried. Moses tried that, it didn't work for him.
Yeah, that's the only thing keeping us going.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you for that. Chapter 7, let's read a little bit more until Jackie throws the red flag on me. Who's our next reader?
Me,
All right.
early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all his men camped at the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Morah.
Pause right there. I got a picture of the spring of Harod right out there. It's in the second column the third picture down. And there's just a little spring of water comes up out of the rock and it just kind of trickles down. And that's where the test took place. You see it? That little cave looking thing? All right. Read on. Verse 2.
The Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands, in order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her."
All right, pause right there. This is another, I think, revelation of the error, the problems that were going on in Israel at the time. It says, the Lord said to Gideon, "You got too many soldiers with you. If you go into battle with all these soldiers, what might happen? Israel might become boastful, saying, my own power, our own power has delivered us." And I think that's what was going on at the beginning. I think that's why they were oppressed by Midian, is because the Israelites were trying to say, our power is sufficient for our own protection. You know, that's an error that we all make, don't we? We all have a tendency to fall into that belief of self-sufficiency, or that I can rely upon my own flesh, or that I can rely upon some other flesh. And time again, God has said, don't do it. Do not rely on your own flesh. Do not rely on any flesh. Rely only on me. I will deliver you. I will give you everything you need. But, you know, we see the Israelites hadn't learned it as at this point in time. So God's going to teach them a lesson. Read on.
"Announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. Some 22,000 men left, while 10,000 remained."
You got to wonder if Gideon himself was thinking, am I going to leave or am I going to stay? Read on.
But the Lord said to Gideon, "There are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say, this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say, this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told them, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongue like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place."
Pause right there. Now, I have read many analyses of how it was that these 300 men were chosen. Some say, well, they're the ones who picked up the water and they brought it up to the mouth so they could look around, they could be circumspect, they could, so it was the sharpest ones who were chosen as the 300. I think it's just the opposite. I think the 300 that were chosen were the absolute doofus of the group. They showed themselves to be inferior and stupid, and God did exactly that. He said, "Send all the brave ones home." All right, I want the absolute lowest of the low, the stupidest, the ones that you would never expect to be the victors. Those are the ones that I'm choosing for my army. And so that's just my take on it. You read it, you can decide for yourself. But God wasn't looking for the strongest or the best. God was going to show a mighty miracle about how he was going to deliver Israel through one weak man, Gideon, and 3 other weak men. And they were going to defeat an army of 135,000 men with swords. And it's not reported, at least at this point in time, that Gideon's ragtag army of 300 had one sword among all of them. They didn't have any weapon for battle at all. Okay, read on. Wanda, you want to pick up there?
So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. Now the camp of Midian lay below him in the valley. During that night the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outpost of the camp.
All right, pause right there just a second. This is another example of Gideon looking for a sign or wanting a sign. He didn't verbalize his desire for the sign, but God is saying, all right, there's the camp. I mean, it's just a monstrous camp of a mighty army. And here's old Gideon with his 300 men. You can kind of see him shaking in his boots. And God comes to him and said, yep, that's the battleground, and that's the army that you're going to defeat. He says, if you are afraid, this is what you can do. So God basically says, if you're looking for a sign, here's what you can do. Go down there, and I'm going to give you a sign. And he does. So read on.
The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I had a dream, he was saying. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. His friend responded, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands."
Pause right there. Now, get the picture. This is Gideon. He's going down and he's sneaking into the camp, and he puts his ear to the side of a tent, and he hears two guys talking. One of them says he had this vision of a loaf of barley bread just rolling into, barley is the most humble of the breads of the grain, and it rolls in the camp, and the whole tent fell. And his friend, the other guy in the tent, interprets the dream. And not only does he interpret the dream as being a defeat of that army, he calls the leader by name. He says, this is nothing less than the son of Gideon. Can you imagine what was that?
The sword of
I'm sorry, the
Gideon.
sword of Gideon. Can you imagine what Gideon must have felt like at that point in time? He didn't even have a sword in his hand. and here's a guy that he's never met before, an enemy in a camp is calling him by name and saying, it's the sword of Gideon who's going to destroy us. Wow. All right, Jackie threw the flag on me, so we'll pick up here next time. But again, I want to, as we read through here, it's interesting to see how God chooses the most unlikely and most unlikely of circumstances to do his will. And Tommy asked a very profound question, and I think it's a question that we should all think about. Think about how God is intervening in our lives. Sometimes in a great way, sometimes in a minor way, but I think God always wants us to have our ears open because he's talking to us and he's going to show us how he is right there with us, guiding us to exactly where he wants us to be. We should be mindful of that.